Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Crystal King. Crystal is an author, culinary enthusiast, and marketing expert. Her writing is fueled by a love of history and a passion for the food, language, and culture of Italy. She has taught classes in writing, creativity, and social media at Harvard Extension School, Boston University, Mass College of Art, UMass Boston, and Grub Street, one of the leading creative writing centers in the U.S. A Pushcart-nominated poet and former co-editor of the online literary arts journal Plum Ruby Review, Crystal received her MA in critical and creative thinking from UMass Boston, where she developed a series of exercises and writing prompts to help fiction writers in media res. She considers Italy her next great love after her husband, Joe, and their 2 cats, Nero and Merlin. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so fun to be here. It's for everybody listening. I completely botched this. I was late. I was unorganized. I couldn't figure out how to see my screen. So you're getting me. I'm on my heels now, but I'm getting back into it. Here we go. And look at this beautiful cover of Crystal's book. And it is such a fabulous read. My stupid ring light is making it glare, but there you go. Oh yeah. Oh, yours is. And yours is a hardcover. Yeah. It's beautiful.
We will be back giving, is like gorgeous.
Yes. We'll be giving one of these away. So, stay tuned for that giveaway on the Facebook page. First off, Crystal, welcome. Tell us all about your book, In the Garden of Monsters.
So it's a retelling of the myth of Hades and Persephone, but it's told from the point of view of a model that Salvador Dali brings to a garden of stone monsters in 1948. And it is a fun, wild, strange book, lots of food. And
yes.
One thing that's cool is the garden is a real place. And Salvador Dali actually went there in 1948, so I got to play with that a bit.
I mean, and Salvador Dali as like a part of the myth, like how did that even come to you? It seems like was it born from the gardens and knowing that he'd been there?
Yeah, so I back in after COVID, I was trying to figure out what I was going to write next. I have a couple historical fiction books under my belt, and historical fiction just wasn't grabbing the editors that we were going out to.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, Chris Walder, who wrote this incredible Gothic novel called Unnatural Creatures, which is about the women of Frankenstein. We were talking and commiserating just about the state of books,
the business, right,
as authors do,
we do, right. What else can we do?
I'm like, what could I write that might sell? What could I do? And she's like, well, Gothics are hot. I was like, oh, if I were going to write a Gothic, what would I write? And then I immediately thought of this garden that I had been to a couple years before. And so the garden is in Bomarzo, Italy, which is an hour north of Rome. And it is a surreal place. It's full of stone statues of all sorts of like gods and goddesses and mythological creatures. And it was created in the 1500s by a man named Vicino Orsini. And when he died, it was overgrown for almost 400 years. And in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the surrealists started to hear about this garden and they started to go there. And in 1948, Salvador Dali went to this garden and filmed a tiny movie, which you can see on my website, crystalking.com.
Oh,
and it's like 3 minutes long. It's super small, like the kind of movies that they would show before films in the old days.
Yeah.
And then so I thought, okay, that's interesting. And when I started studying the garden, so in the garden, the very heart of the garden, so on the cover of the book, there's a monster, and she's walking into the monster.
Right.
It's a real like rock. It's a statue that's carved out, and there's a tongue that's a table that's in the center. And so this is what the monster essentially looks like. But picture like a table tongue.
Oh, wow. Right.
So you can see about 4 people around the tongue. And Also in this garden is a statue of Demeter, and she is looking towards the mouth of hell, which is this mouth, or the Orco or ogre. And then there's a bench to Persephone in this garden. And Cerberus the dog, which is protecting the veil between the underworld and the overworld. And all sorts of like dragons and sirens. And it's just this weird, crazy place. So I thought
God,
this is
yeah.
so surreal. It's so strange and so different. I'm gonna set the book there.
Yeah, and I've never heard of it. I mean, it's like, Italy is also high on my list of loves. But I think, yeah, I mean, that is actually, I mean, that's location in this book, not just the gardens, but the house, is such a huge part of the story, and you really feel like you're there. And Julia is this. She's also an artist, of course, which Salvador reminds her that women aren't really artists. They're fake
You
artists.
really believe that women should only be muses?
Yeah. Well, and his wife, did you do research on him? Because his wife is such a character.
Yeah, they both were just interesting, fascinating, problematic people.
Yeah.
He was such a genius and very charismatic, and he was a narcissist. He was set out to shock and awe. And Gala, his wife, is somebody who was his manager, was the only reason he probably made any money. And
Right.
she had vision for how to get him to make money. And he worshiped the ground she walked on. And there are a lot of like it's a trend right now to go back through history and write news stories for women who have been misaligned, or
Right. Right. Right.
maligned, I should say, not misaligned, but and
Maybe
she
also misaligned, but we don't
maybe
know. Maligned. Got it.
but she was somebody who she all of the research, all of the autobiographies that I read from other women, for example, and from people that knew both of the two of them, and there's a lot of information about them, and they all kind of point to the fact that she was just not a very nice person. She just
Yeah.
wasn't.
She didn't
And
seem nice in the book, but she's a
no,
perfect foil, because of course, and Julia walks this really fine line because Salvador, as you said, is a narcissist, but also like there's a lot of sort of energy around sexual energy, and she's like trying to play the part of like, and also she's a nude model, right? I mean, she's
yeah,
gonna be there and be naked on the bench for him to draw her. And so it talk about being the vulnerability of her character, right? In all the ways is
yeah,
so interesting. And the way, and then let's talk about our, what do we even call him? Our alpha
the
male.
host,
Mm-hmm.
Ignacio. So
Mm-hmm.
Julia has two love interests in this book, and Ignacio is the host, and he is very mysterious. He is the one that is supposed to. He makes sure that the palazzo that they're staying in, everything is set. He's the one that's going to make sure that they get to the garden. He's the orchestrator of all the meals that they eat. He's extraordinarily handsome and very charismatic, but also mysterious, and you
Yeah,
wonder.
dangerous feels.
Yes,
Yeah,
dangerous. Like he's that danger guy. And then
right.
Jack, he's your down home jock. He is like
Mm-hmm.
a big burly guy that's going to carry all the easels around for Dali. He's also kind of a love interest for Gala. And so their relationship was also very interesting in real life, in that she had lots of lovers, and Dali liked to watch. And
Oh.
so he that was their relationship. And so I got to bring Jack along, and
Yeah.
Jack had, he had relationship with them as a couple, but then was also interested in Julia, and Julia
Mm-hmm.
finds that she's very torn between the two of them.
Yes. And it's interesting because I mean, when we talk about it like that, one can minimize sort of the depth of the layering of these relationships. This is not like a, Dark Knight, not, I mean, we love those, but this is not that. This is it's the sort of historical, I mean, all the research done, all the stuff you bring in, and also sort of the, you know, that Julia, it seems she's got, she doesn't know where she comes from, right? She woke up with sort of
Just
somewhere,
amnesia.
some memories. And so it's interesting. Like, I think there's, it's such a story of a woman, like, really trying to find herself, right? I mean, and of course, that's what I love. My favorite thing in the whole world to talk about is women finding themselves. Um, so I love, obviously, Julia, you created Julia in, in a light. I mean, you pulled from history, but really you created her. So I guess I want to talk about, like, once you figured out the garden. I'm assuming Ignacio comes with the garden, right? He's sort of that. We
Yep.
know who he. I mean, we guess how he fits in. But how did you build Julia? How do you build characters? What's your sort of process?
So, and I don't know, that kind of comes organically once I have a sense of the shape of the story.
Hmm.
And I have to apologize if you can hear my very loud kitty. Oh,
That's so funny. I can't
that's so
hear.
crazy because he's right next to me and he's deaf and he's loud. So, I'll give you a
Not
quick,
yet. Oh,
here we go. Because the internet
oh,
thrives on
hi.
cats. And so this is
Totally
Merlin.
does.
And
Merlin is
Merlin.
so cute. Well, all I can offer is this. This is George. Um,
Oh,
I know. And I have another one that's sitting in the corner, but you're a good boy. He's been on
okay.
the internet a lot too.
Okay,
Okay,
you
Merlin, you're good. Boy, I can't hear you. And I
hear?
appreciate that.
Me too. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Okay, so Julia. So, so I start with like the shape of the story, and then figure out like, okay, who is my main character?
Hmm.
Julia had a backstory originally. She was somebody that had a bad boyfriend in Rome that she had kicked to the curb. She was always an art student. But in the course of like how the story was shaped and how where I wanted it to go, it didn't, the backstory that she had didn't make sense. So we
Hmm.
lost the old bad boyfriend. I mentioned the bad boyfriend, but I don't
Hmm.
but
Yeah,
I
you
don't
don't explore
show it.
him. Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
And
Um,
and
yeah.
so a lot of that's organic. This like Lillian is her best friend, and Lillian's she's at the very beginning of the book, and then she doesn't appear again until halfway through, and then she comes
Hmm.
to the garden,
Yeah.
and that was definitely a relationship that just kind of came together as I was writing the novel,
Yeah.
and I think she's an amalgam of all the really great, good female friends I've had in my life.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. So when you say the shape of the story, did you start the story? I mean, there's a natural, of course, because you're using a real life.
The myth, yeah.
Yeah, the myth. Real life isn't probably the same. What I really mean, but you're using an existing text to to base the story on. You sort of knew how it was going to end. Although it
I
could have.
had
I
I
mean,
had elements of it. So
yes,
I changed the myth, and some people might not know what to do with how I changed the myth. But
yes. You
um,
refer to that in your author's note. But I think but as you said, some really wonderful stories have come. Obviously, Circe, and then also, like, Hamnet, which was about
yeah,
William Shakespeare's wife. I mean, it is really interesting to get the perspective, because I think so many of these stories really were focused on the men, right,
yeah,
or on these huge gods. Like, we know much more about you know Hades and than we do about Persephone. Do we call him
yeah,
Hades
a
in
lot
this?
more.
Is that right? Did I get that
Yep.
right?
Well, I call him Pluto in the book,
Oh, right, 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 right.
but when I talk about them, I use Hades and Demeter and Persephone because people
Yes.
aren't as familiar with the Roman names, which is Pluto and Proserpina and Ceres. They're just not as familiar. So, but
I
they're
was
the
like,
same.
wait, yeah, they're the same. I know. But yeah, so I mean, I think, we it's so fun to have had this opportunity to explore it. So, okay, so a couple of historical fiction novels not based on time periods, or I'm sorry to say I haven't read all of your work. So, this felt like a departure for you.
It was. So my first two novels are about culinary figures in history. So my first
Uh-huh.
novel is Feast of Sorrow, and it's about an ancient Roman gourmand, a guy named Apicius who was a real person, and his name is on the oldest known cookbook. And he died in a super messed up way. So I told the story of how he got there. And
Got it.
then my second novel is about a Renaissance chef and that's He was a chef that had a best-selling cookbook that was published in 1570, and it was best-selling for almost 200 years after he died. And he was
Wow. I love a best-selling novel in 1570. That
a
is
cookbook. It was
a
like,
cookbook.
yeah.
I know. My
So
cookbook friends would be like, what?
yeah. So, and it has 1,000 recipes in it, a lot of which are very common to us today, a lot of pasta and things like that. And like the ancient Romans ate French toast. That's where French toast originated. There's no French involved, but
Interesting.
there's a lot of like fun history and the chef's secret. That's a love story. We don't know a lot about his life, so I got to make that up. But in
Yeah.
those two novels, I have the lives of a person and I have the history that's all around them, and I can just fill in all the gaps.
Right.
Um, in this one, I'm working with a historical, or I'm working with a mythical story that is
Yeah.
not real, but
Right.
then I insert a very real person into it. And so I had this fun juxtaposition of those things. And because
Yeah.
I have all this food history in my underneath my belt, because I
Yeah.
actually have written two other novels about culinary figures that haven't been published yet. So I got to like play with all these different eras of food history,
Oh, the
and
food descriptions were amazing. And the
some
way
of
that I mean, that's the other thing is you did such a beautiful job painting those pictures of like the dining room and the way the wait staff was weirdly, they didn't really talk to anybody, but they like changed clothes to match and then there's one particular food that she's very aware of. It becomes like, and then the other gentleman who is Lillian's,
Paulo.
I can't, yeah, Paulo. I mean, it's really like you created like it's a kind of a
Yes, it's
locked
a
room
week
story.
with just a few people.
Yeah, but it really felt like such a big, beautiful book. So congratulations. I think that's amazing. I'm super excited for the world to see it because I feel like, you know, it's so unusual and so gripping. And anyway, I really, really loved it. So tell me can you talk about what you're working on now? Don't you hate that question?
Yeah.
You're like, I'm just putting out this beautiful book. Could you let me enjoy it for 10 seconds before?
I can tell you a little bit, but before I do that, if
Yeah,
it wants to try any of the recipes,
yeah.
I worked with chefs and food historians and other food book bloggers, and my husband and we recreated some of the recipes, and you can download the cookbook for free on my website.
Crystalking.com. I love that.
Yep.
Okay.
And then I also have a page about the garden, Il Sacro Bosco Garden, and which means the sacred wood. And then
Yeah.
there's a page about Dali, and so all the strange, cool, weird stuff about Salvador Dali. So,
That's
but
really cool that you did that. Yeah, because there is a lot. It seems like this is like we're touching on the sort of tip of the iceberg on some of this stuff. So fun that you
yeah,
have done
and there's
that.
a lot of visual stuff that if you could actually see what I'm talking about, like for example,
Yes.
painting that figures in at the end of the novel, which is not very common to in Dali's repertoire, but I have that on my site, so you can go see what it looks like, for
So
example,
that is a real painting too. I was wondering about that. Okay,
at the
well I'm
very
gonna go
end.
I'm gonna go check that out because that's really
Yeah.
cool.
So I'm working on a novel that will come out at the end of next year, and we're still working on the title and
Hmm.
some of the things around that. But we're currently doing that right now, which is always super fun.
Yeah.
But it's a novel about Greek gods as well, but it's about really lesser known gods. Like if I said
Yeah.
a couple of these gods, you probably wouldn't know who they were.
Yeah.
But the pantheon of Greek gods is huge. So there's a lot
Right.
of room, and it's contemporary, and there's no food in it. So
Ah!
that is like the biggest swerve for me is that there's no
You're
food.
like, wait a minute, what are they eating? I love that. Well, it seemed like, I mean, you have such a beautiful grip um, on the sort of the way you handle the myth, I think, in this book. So that's so fun. I'm glad to hear you're doing it again because I think that's fabulous. And it does seem to me like it's fun to bring them. I mean, you brought them obviously to the 1940s in this book, but to bring them to the contemporary. Is it set in Italy?
Yeah. It's partially set in Italy, it's partially set in London, but mostly Italy. It's mostly
Yeah.
Italy. And I bring
Do
in a
you?
bunch of history, but it's in a very different way. Yeah, this one's a crazy, it's basically, it's not set on a specific myth, but it
Okay.
has the gods in this world. And you can think of it as a reverse Pandora's box.
Interesting. Okay. I'm gonna have to think on that one a bit to see what that means. But well, good for you for already having it. I mean, for being so far along, because you're trying to do, one a year is hard when you're writing a book of this sort of,
Yeah, and I have a day
depth.
job.
You do.
Yeah.
You're a busy lady.
But I'm a childless cat lady. That makes it a lot easier so that I can just write and not have to worry about shuffling kids to soccer or things like that, right? So
Childless cat ladies are very popular right now, as I understand it. I am not a childless cat lady.
But you have a dog, and
I have 2 dogs. I actually sometimes have 4 dogs. Yes, I'm a empty nester dog mom is what I am. So, but yeah, that's fabulous. Well, it sounds like you work in the, do you work? Is this what are you teaching? Is that what you're doing in
no,
your
I
day
work for a
job?
software company and I teach social media and AI. So it's just a very different
Wow.
curve, but
Yeah.
and but so I write every morning for an hour. That's how I do things. And so I figured out a while back that I have 2 chances of being a career author and
Yeah.
making enough money at it, right? So
Yeah.
you can be lucky or you can be
Yeah.
prolific. So
Yeah.
I decided the only way I'm going to be prolific is if I sit my butt in a chair every single day for an hour. And so
Yeah. Good for
write a
you.
book a day if I do that. I mean, a book a year if I do that.
Yeah. And tell me about that. So do you get up, is it like at 5 a.m.? What time are you getting up?
No, because I work from home, which makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I write every morning from like 7:30 to 8:30, and then I start working on my other job.
Right away. Yeah. I mean, I think so we have a lot of aspiring authors, I think, who listen to the show. And I think that's the button chair, which is, what the shorthand for exactly what you're talking about is that, everyone's like, how do I do it? And I think, yeah, the first thing you do is you do it. You
My
do it.
first novel I wrote entirely on the weekends. And it took me like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference. I don't think you have to write every day, but that something happens when you live in your books.
Yeah.
And just even if so a goal of 400 words a day will write you
Yeah.
a book a year. And that's not that
Yeah.
much, like a page and a half, right? 2 pages
Yeah. Right.
maybe. And
I
but
mean,
your
right.
characters just live in your mind when you're not
Right.
writing, and your books just are different. Um,
I
and
think
I
that's so true.
and I feel bereft when I finish a book because I'm like, oh my gosh, like those characters have been in my head for so long, and now suddenly I have to
Yeah.
shift gears. So
I'm losing a friend. I think it's like having, I always think of it as a little bit like having a friend in crisis, somebody who like really needs a little of you every day. And so
yeah,
you're always kind of checking in. And if you do it, I mean, 5 days a week is great. I mean, there have been times when I've been in my book 7 days a week. And for me, if I miss a day, it's like, you feel like you're sort of lost touch. And so it's what you said. It's like, you get to know them in a way that's so at this crucial part in their life, right? Because characters are in crisis. That's
yeah.
the very nature of the story.
Well,
And
I
so
find I
you
can't sleep at night in the same way because what I do to go to sleep is I think of what the next scene in my book is,
that.
and I'm asleep like that, which
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
bad.
right. You're right. Well, it is actually I keep a notepad and now I just use my phone, but I used to keep a notepad and pencil by the bed because I do find sometimes the best ideas come in that liminal space, right? When you're
Yeah,
like you relax or if you're like folding laundry or doing something that's so totally
yeah,
um
totally true.
or yeah, or maybe, working a different job. I spent 10 years in finance while I was writing and for sure it'd be like I'd be doing something felt very uncreative and
Yeah,
that would be the moment when I'd be like, oh, that's what should happen. So that's fantastic. Well, this is wonderful. I know you're on Instagram too. Tell us where to find you on Instagram.
I'm at Crystal Lynn 14. So CrystalLyn 14.
And Crystal King, just like it sounds, .com, it sounds like is your website. And I'm so excited for this. It is really such a fabulous story. And what is the pub date? Remind me.
The September 24th. So
Okay,
just
so this
like
is
10 days from here.
yeah, 10 days. So our show goes live on the 26th because we go on Thursdays.
So it'll
So
be
you
out
can
by the time you see
it'll be
this.
out. So when you're watching this, you can go grab it right now. You can download it. You can go to your local bookstore. I'm really excited to see what this book does, Crystal.
Me too.
Congratulations. I know. This is the best part, right?
Yep,
Years and years of work for these 10 days. So
exactly. It's so true.
enjoy it. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us on Killer Women today with Crystal King. I'm Danielle, and we will see you next time. Bye.